Hi, everybody. Alex Sherwood, Director of Product Marketing at Provar, the leading innovator in Salesforce testing. Welcome to today's webinar. We must address testing in low-code development. I'd like to start by introducing Diego Lo Giudice, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester. Diego's a leading expert in software development lifecycle practices, including test automation. He's going to lead us off today with a short presentation, after which I'll introduce our two amazing industry experts for our panel from Salesforce and from Elements.cloud. And together with Diego, we'll have a conversation about what every organization needs to be thinking about when planning to test low-code applications. Over to you, Diego.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Alex, and welcome everybody. So I'm just going to give you some visibility into the recent research that we conducted in Forrester around low code and testing. And the reason is because, and actually one of the outcomes of that was that I don't think that we're doing enough testing in the low code world. But let's look at the actual results that we got. So everybody is accelerating digital. COVID put even more pressure to do so. And the goal for every enterprise is not a minor one, right? It's they are under stress for going faster, but everything an enterprise does has to be effective, meaning it has to deliver value for the business, has to be adaptable, and adaptable because there is change going on continuously, and the actual pandemic proved that need for adaptability. Being close to the business is the only way to be effective. So there's kind of same goal there. And then last but not at least, scalable businesses. We do things, companies are becoming more and more global. And as we introduce new technologies, those technologies, the use of the applications have to be able to deal with the level of scalability that is required. And so if those are the goals, what is the answer? Well, we all know the answer is digital, nothing surprising. But let me give you a bit more of the definition that Forrester uses, which it's less about just automating everything and digitizing everything, but it's about really an organization that is introducing digital has to be able to basically adapt and modify and grow new business models. In Forrester, we give a definition that being digital means that software is an expression of the business. And when software is an expression of the business, it really means that a truly digital business can quickly implement and improve its policies that are now represented through software, which can, you change the software, you change the policies, you change the processes. And so everything is software. And if everything is software, then it really becomes, automation becomes a side effect almost of that process. Now, we've seen over the last few years and months, especially, this evolution and change in the workforce, which is the introduction, the shifting away from everybody uses spreadsheets, right? We're kind of over the paper, not really, because still there's about 60 to 70% of the organizations we've interviewed in some research we did has some sort of dependency on paper still somewhere in the organization. But there's lots of use of spreadsheets, but there's this new and growing role of citizen development. In other words, with business people that now use even more than just spreadsheets, but actually these, low code, no code tools or environments that allow them, development tools that allow business people to automate and build small, simple applications. But actually what we're seeing is that now the availability of these tools is allowing even broader enterprise development of applications. So what we've really learned, as I said, huge lesson from COVID is that those that during COVID had a foundation to be able to automate easier and sooner and faster were the ones that made it through the pandemic very successfully, actually, even able to grow, or at least, keep the business they had, the clients they had. And so those that didn't have an adaptable foundation struggled. And what is that adaptable foundation? Well, it's things like having being ready, cloud ready. It's having and using those tools like low-code development platforms and digital process automation platforms that are newer technologies that impose less costs and lower costs and lower efforts to do things faster and quicker. And when we look at the data around the low code world, because we've been writing quite a bit of research around low code, I think actually the definition of low code was defined by John Reimer and Forrester a few years back. As you can see, there's kind of three categories of related technologies when it comes to process automation. Workflow in low code for pro developer tools, so tools that are more easier to use, low code level for programming developers, for developers themselves, traditional business process management software, and last but not least, digital process automation solutions for more large-scale deployments. Forrester believes that these three different categories, which have overlaps and intersections, actually are converging, and everything is going to become more of a digital process automation tool. The big focus is around process, of course, but then the low-code tools themselves help automate at the application level. So that convergence towards digital process automation is going to happen. But the point really is that more and more automation is going to be deployed by business, by organizations into production. It's interesting when we did that research around low code and even I did also a similar research around robotic process automation and testing. We found out, for example, that there's very little testing done. And so these different use cases, each one of these different automation tools kind of adapted to different use cases on the business side, including the use of artificial intelligence for building applications. All of them have a foundation of low code and no code. So these are all kind of low code, no code environments. And you can see the vendors, of course, on that are and the list is quite huge. I just put up a few in this slide, and the question is, who is going to and how are we going to test all that automation? And what I found out when I talked to those RPA and to those low code users, I found that even in the RPA world, for example, they tend to build automation and connect, maybe just automating between extracting data from a file or a database and introducing that data in input to an SAP or a Salesforce or some other business package. Even in doing simple automation of tasks they would do those in production and they would not test. And now when organizations are doing those those type of implementations, they're not very large scale applications that they're building, but they're automating bits of processes and simple apps for supporting their business day by day. Think about doing that at scale in an enterprise and changing these bots in RPA in production without doing testing. I think it's going to generate it's a high risk. It's a very high risk that we're putting into our production systems, and I think as more and more of these type of technologies are used by business, this question becomes even much more important, right? And so if we look at the world of testing, then right in the custom software development world, we know the trend today is that testing takes a village. In other words, yes, there's been a push of involving more and pushing more testing on developers because everybody thinks, well, automating tests is a job of writing code and it's technical, and that's what the tools really offered. But developer testers really are not just the only personas that are involved in testing. You've got the technical subject matter expert, which is the usual manual testers that have been doing testing for years. They're technically expert in testing, but they don't like coding, their automation as the developer tester would. And then you've got the business tester, which is the third type of persona that, especially with Agile and DevOps, having product owners involved in those teams, testing gets done in sprint, and therefore you've got also the user acceptance testing that is done by business testers, and that also, as you move forward in the sprints, all the user acceptance testing and regression testing that happens, needs to be automated as well. So organizations have these three type of personas. Some of them have, maybe more developer testers than business testers, depending on the type of applications they're building, depending on the market that they're in. And when you move this into the world of low code, it's clear that the focus shifts more towards the business tester, especially when it's no code, right? If you have a no code or a low code environment for building an application, why would you want to give testing as a testing tool something that is for a developer? It just doesn't make sense, especially from a business perspective, because the business package apps, we're talking about business processes, and so there's a bigger and more important role for business testers and those manual technical testers, and less so for developer testers. So there's a bit of a shift of focus when we move into the low code, no code testing world. And this is, you don't have to take my word for this. This is the data that came back from my continuous functional test automation wave, where I evaluated 15 of the leading continuous automation testing platforms for custom application. Also being able to do some packaged application testing. And you can see that the question that was asked here was, does your tool address your technical tester needs or your developer tester needs or your business tester needs? And they could choose, the options among these personas. And you can see that the business tester is the option that is less addressed by the tools. So there's a growing need of business testers, but the current testing solutions that are coming, growing out from the custom application development building world, and that sometimes are used in the low code world, don't do a great job, or not a job as good as they do for technical and developer testers for business testers. So that's a problem, right? That's a gap. So what do I predict? What does Forrester predict will happen no code going forward? Well, first of all, there has to be a growing trend, and we predict there will be a growing trend of even low code testing tools, right? So if you have a low code development tool, that has to have a low code testing as well. The democratization of low code, that's something else, something also that we're hearing a lot about, right? The citizen developers. And that democratization of low code will require even more the democratization of testing. So meaning it has to be something easy to use that can be leveraged, just as the low code tools get democratized, so will the testing tools or the components of testing that those low code tools might have. They normally integrate with third-party tools, by the way. And the third element is that democratization of low code is definitely a trend, and it's not going away. So the citizen developers are here to stay. But our prediction is that as more low code and no code are used to build at scale applications, enterprise scale applications, IT involvement is going to become very relevant, and for governance and for testing. So it's not going to be that just business people will grab a tool and start using and deploy. We believe that the forms in which democratization is going to happen, we actually think there's a kind of another approach, which is a federated approach to the democratization, meaning that there's always a centralized center of excellence that testing and that low code governance is going to be governing that low code happening in the various business teams. And last but not least, there's going to be more testing coming, and it's just going to be also on one side through the education that we're doing, and low code vendors are learning more about the need for having some testing solutions, but also because as they scale these solutions and build more applications that are enterprise wide, even going across different platforms or different clouds, end-to-end automation of that is going to be a big pain. But even the sheer amount of automation deployed into production, even if simple, is just going to provide a bigger pain that can only have one answer, which is testing, right? So increasing the level of quality of what goes into production. Back to you, Alex.
Thanks, Diego, for that excellent background. It's clear that low-code development is big and getting bigger, and that we're going to need a plan for testing. Now's the part of the webinar where we get our panel experts to chime in with their thoughts. In addition to Diego, we've got a great couple of guys with us. Andy Fawcett, Vice President of Product Management at Salesforce, our favorite low-code development platform. And Ian Gotts, founder and CEO of Elements Cloud, a change intelligence platform that accelerates time to value for Salesforce implementations. And we talked about the fact that there are more and more low-code applications being built. And as they get more complex, thinking about more integrations, more customizations, more features, how do you avoid the law of unintended consequences? And I'm thinking here, a personal example, I was involved in a 5-way CRM integration that, as a result of an integration rule, accidentally opted out every single customer from a big line of business. And I'm wondering, is that a, unusual outcome, or is that more middle of the road? And I know, Ian, that you've seen a lot of this type of thing. Can you comment on this?
I think Diego summarized it well, which is actually it's not about whether it's low code or no code. The fact that now applications are more strategic. We're building broader applications which have larger consequences. As he said, businesses now run on software. So I think the real issue we now have is that we need to start applying the disciplines that we probably knew from our big systems development days. We need to apply those disciplines into our citizen developers and make sure that they have those disciplines. So as you said, we need to understand what the real requirements are, make sure that we understand what the business is trying to do, the changes we're due to make, then understand the risk of those changes, which means then we can scale the development resources and then, more importantly, the testing resources to make sure it matches it. I mean, we don't need to test everything. We need to test those things where we know the highest risk is. But unless we understand the business and understand the risk of those changes, it's very difficult to allocate the testing resources in the right way. So I think absolutely, as Diego said, we're going to see more and more of this as low code enables people to build things very quickly. And that's clearly the power of Salesforce. As we build things more quickly, we need to make sure that we have the right disciplines in place to make sure that we don't break things and we genuinely can support the business as it needs to scale, as it needs to change.
One of the things that Diego was talking about in terms of the rise of the citizen tester, we've been talking to more than a few customers who are migrating core legacy applications onto low-code platforms. And I wonder if you all are seeing the same thing, and if that's going to affect the mix of, let's say, pro coder and citizen tester personas going forward.
Yeah, I think absolutely the theme we're seeing here is that, as we just heard, that the understanding of how process and software development has been done over the years is becoming ever more applicable to low code. And I think those individuals that are practicing citizen development needn't feel like that's going to change for them, but what will change is how the process that surrounds them and the safety nets that are around pipelines and application lifecycle management will mature around what it is they're doing. And that's a good thing, because they'll find themselves teaming up with individuals that can do other low code capabilities, or even write code that complements what they can build in low code. So I think ultimately we'll see them being more empowered to be able to deliver solutions with a broader team, with the power of an ALM process that understands what low code and pro code can do together. And Salesforce is very excited to be working on its next evolution of what that looks like with its DevOps Center. And that's something that's available in pilot, and we'll be looking to release that later next year. And this brings together that fusion of teams and people together that can have one pipeline that's visible to everybody with your work items. And that's really empowering for me, because it means that there's a lot of visibility, and people get a lot of things done when they work together. So I think the evolution is going to be really empowering for everybody.
Yeah, and I think actually that's a fundamental point, right? So people are using low code, no code because they want to do things fast, right? Faster. And so the key for that collaboration to be successful is exactly as Andrew mentioned, automating even that development, delivery, and testing process as well, right? So DevOps brings it doesn't eliminate governance, it automates governance, right? We're not saying, hey, no more governance. This is not the Wild West. It's those citizen developers, the pro code developers have to all be working on these platforms that are
Absolutely.
going to help that governance. So automation is going to be key even for development and for
Yeah.
testing, and not just for the business processes.
I see something also happening, which is the rush to low code. As Diego, as you just said, people want to build things faster. But quite often, the faster we go, the farther we go in the wrong direction. And actually, we need to get people to go, okay, let's be clear about what you want to go and build. Because obviously, you can't test unless you understand what the requirement was. And I'm seeing quite a lot of organizations where business analysis, which was a formal discipline, and I'm delighted that now there's a BA certification, a Salesforce BA certification in development, that citizen developers often went, okay, let me just start building, rather than having the disciplines of going, what actually should I be building? And then once I've understood what I really want, then we can build things really fast. But it also then gives a platform for the testers to go, okay, what are we testing against? So we need to think of the whole life cycle, not starting just with the development, but actually it starts earlier in the life cycle. And again, I think investments from Salesforce around training, around promoting that. Delighted the first person on stage at Dreamforce at Mark Benioff's keynote was a business analyst, which is fantastic. So we're getting everyone represented across the whole of the application lifecycle. And again, there's support again in the platform for all of that. So I think we're going in the right direction, but I think we've still got a huge level of education out in the ecosystem to break the mold of just start building.
And so, Andy, you talk to lots of customers. Are you seeing any kind of, say, citizen developer cultural backlash at now having to pay attention to a lot of governance rules and fit into a larger system? Or is everybody saying, basically, this is really important, we just need to do it?
I think there's a lot of hesitation in the safety of it, both from IT teams and individuals that want to know where to get started. But there is a lot of excitement about suddenly being able to bring an idea to life as somebody that didn't know code but knows how to use automation tools. So it's about harnessing that and giving them that safe environment to do those developments. But as Ian pointed out, do it on the backdrop of a business requirement that's well defined, but an ALM system that looks after them through that process so they have that safety net. And the IT departments that are concerned about it being the Wild West will have more comfort because they have our overall visibility of the work items, the pipeline status, just like they did with code. And I think these will go a long way into allowing citizen development to move forward in comfort level for IT and individuals.
So a quick question. Diego, in some of the research you're doing, are you seeing that the ownership of the systems is moving from the business back to IT as it becomes more strategic?
From an organizational perspective, what we see with low code is there's kind of three approaches that clients take. One is the privateer center of excellence, basically autonomous business led teams execute projects, they're dedicated resources. There's some IT approval and support, little. Then there is democratization, end users as developers, more of the low code citizen type. It's a bottom up approach, anyone can develop, generally for apps that are not so complex. Maybe they're across one or two departments, few guardrails, IT center of excellence coaches those teams. And then there's the federated approach. And the federated approach is the most interesting one, and I think one of the most common, which is you have a center of excellence that co-builds and coaches with the teams. So, departmental champions with local developers of low-code developers. Wide range of apps. The guardrails, vary by use case and integration licenses and so forth. And so those democratization towards federation is the trend.
So I've got a question about how you see people going down a, let's say, test automation path. So a lot of our customers follow a path of starting with no testing, then manual testing, and then ending up with test automation. And I guess the question is really for all of the panelists, do you see the same thing? And is there a way that we can shorten that process? Or is that going to happen naturally as the low code development gets more and more important and organizations start to work out something like a federated testing plan? And I guess a follow-on question would be, and this would be for Andy and Diego, well, for everybody as well. What technologies are you seeing that are coming to help address test automation for low code?
Yeah, that's quite a meaty question there. Thanks, Alex. But I'll maybe take a first stab at that. I think ultimately, as we're starting to observe here, this is an area of evolution as tools and technologies catch up with the need for testing for this form of development. And I think it's going to be important that, as Diego pointed out, that these tools are easy to use. You can't provide an easy way of creating something without having an easy way to test it. And so we'll start to see certainly folks feeling the grind of that, adding extra work to their overheads of creating low-code things. But the value of that comes for the next iteration and the iteration after that, when those regression tests become part of an automated suite. And over time, they're making less and less incremental changes, and those tests are more durable as well, as tests need to be durable like any other test that's been created. So I think it will start to cut down on the amount of time that initially you'll see when you have to invest in testing for low code, just as it does with pro code. And it's going to be ever more important that people can use that very easily and record those test scripts and edit those test scripts without being a developer and make it a really seamless process.
I was going to take almost a step above that, which was, I host a Centre of Excellence roundtable every 6 or so weeks with panel sessions like this. And a question that comes up all the time, which is, who owns the Centre of Excellence? Is it business or IT? And what's the role of the Centre of Excellence? And I think we're seeing a huge increase in those organizations who are looking at how do they put some guardrail centralization. And I think, first of all, IT has a central role in that Centre of Excellence because they're bringing some of the disciplines. But one of the pillars of the Centre of Excellence, we define 13 pillars, but one of the pillars is tools, and another one is standards. And I think as people start adopting a Centre of Excellence, they start saying, okay, well, what are our testing standards? What are our testing tools? So I think if you find that an organization has a Centre of Excellence, they're already thinking with a level of maturity about, okay, this is a strategic application we're building. It's touching multiple systems. It has integrations into other systems. So I think there's a natural maturity of the whole of, as Andrew said, the whole of the ALM process. If you see a Centre of Excellence or someone is a Centre of Excellence leader, you know that they have a level of maturity and are thinking about and struggling with how do you do testing. And again, as more and more people start going, okay, every successful organization has a Centre of Excellence, we need one. I think that's the way we start to drive that level of awareness. And that's, I think, the route into better quality testing, better quality release management, better quality business analysis.
Yeah, one of the outputs of a Centre of Excellence that I could imagine being quite important here is what often is called in the pro code world or developer world definition of done. What is it that defines doneness for a feature? And that equally applies to low code development, even if you're doing a bit of pro code and low code together. Definition of done needs to include knowing your requirements, testing your implementation, and also writing the tests for it. And it's not done and it's not in the pipeline until those things are checked off the list. So, start simple with your definition of done, with your requirements, and grow the complexity. But having one of those is a really important asset and an output from such an initiative that Ian's just described.
I don't think it will be the same pace. We're probably going to jump to automation faster than what you've been seeing so far. And the reason is because the organizations are trying and willing right now. I'm getting lots of inquiries on this about wanting to apply continuous delivery, continuous integration. So basically, in other words, delivering fast into production, getting the feedback and using that feedback again into the development cycle, as we do in the custom software world. That's now kind of required or a desire to do the same in these low code and packaged applications world, whether it's DevOps for SAP, DevOps for Salesforce, and for other enterprise-wide applications. And in trying to do continuous delivery, of course, you're trying to go as fast as possible. There's a lot of automation. Testing has to be automated as well. So if it is not automated, it's going to slow down this trend of organizations that want to deliver faster. So I think there's going to be a faster progress towards more automation rather than the 3 steps that you just mentioned, Alex.
Andrew made a really good point, which was we can't make the building tools really easy and the testing tools really hard, because we'll end up. So that's the first thing. The second thing is Diego's point. We can't necessarily test everything, so therefore we need to have some risk analysis of what needs testing, so we can apply the best testing resource to it. That's the way to accelerate things. How do we get a simple test, something simple through the pipeline really quickly, but not lose the trust of the business users? Every time we break the system, we're losing the trust of the business users, which is why do I bother asking you for this stuff? Because then the system goes down. So there's this balance of sort of speed versus safety and quality. There's sort of this triumvirate which we need to try and balance.
So let me ask this. Do we now have enough market pressure to solve the gap that Diego was talking about in terms of test tool capability and a match for a citizen tester?
I'll kind of take a first pass on that question. I think it's part 2 of your earlier question, Alex, so thanks for bringing us back to that. And I'm really excited about an open source initiative called UTAM. And it's a very easy initiative to find because it's utam.dev. And it stands for UI Test Automation Model. And this initiative is aimed at making the art of testing UI simplified and streamlined, easy to maintain, and also actually cross-platform. And that ease of maintenance is super important. I'll get onto that in a moment. But easy to write and avoids common pitfalls with UI testing. UI testing, especially in the browser, is fraught with changes in the way the browser renders things, and binding your tests to those type of things can be quite time consuming, as tests need to be constantly maintained and evolved. So making sure that that low cost of ownership is important for a testing framework that's testing against UIs. Salesforce actually has a library that injects into this framework that allows for building of UI test frameworks upon it. And it's actually in pilot right now. If you go to the website, the spring version will be available for general use. But there is more to this framework. It will be language agnostic. You'll be able to use different programming languages if you desire, but you'll also be able to use Selenium and WebDriver and other test frameworks that allow you to record these type of tests and make it super easy for other non-technical folks to contribute to that test automation framework. So I'm really excited about the advent of that. And as you say, I think it's a rich place for not only tools like this, but also ways to integrate these tests into your ALM lifecycle. So they're all run automatically, not just the coded unit tests and regression tests, but these UI tests are equally super important for regression testing. So I wanted to kind of highlight that one and pass it back to the panel for additional thoughts.
So that's UI, but if you think about much of the power of low code is the ability to put back-end automation. You think about how Process Builder has evolved to flows. And internally, Elements, we've got some really complex flows, and trying to build testing for that is really challenging. And then you get beyond that into those flows are now, with functions, we're now kicking off third-party systems. So testing is no longer, does my little Salesforce application here work, but actually what's the downstream impact? So I think the challenge is that low code and the integrations are evolving faster than maybe the test applications can evolve. And I think there needs to be a vision about what testing looks like in terms of overall business testing in sort of low code 3.0 or whatever that looks like, so that we're far enough ahead to make sure we've got the systems in place to test the end-to-end business rather than, well, my unit test works, that's great. Well, yeah, but actually I want to make sure the whole business works.
I think Ian's raising the point that holistic testing end-to-end is very important to have environments that you can do that in that are isolated from your production environment. It goes without saying, hopefully people on this call will know not to do that in their production, but a lot of the integration and data and things resides there. So it's going to be ever important to be able to spin up environments with sophisticated data and masked data, and be able to have environments that point to test services that you might be integrating with. So environmental management is also really important. Again, as ever it was with software development, it is, of course, now with low-code.
But of course, there are applications out there that don't have sandboxes. So there things are spinning up as, oh, we're now a development platform. The answer is great. What's the sandbox look like? I mean, I started Salesforce in 2000. So in the early days, there was no sandbox. You built in production, and we went, that's kind of weird, but actually it's not strategic. Now you couldn't think about building something now in Salesforce without using a sandbox. But not every application out there has a sandbox. So again, we've got some weird workarounds to try and build those dev environments. So again, it's the platform builders also need to provide the structure so you can build decent test harnesses.
Yes, I agree with what Andy and Jan said. End-to-end is going to be much more, actually even more complex, because organizations have multiple platforms. They start with customer journeys that traverse from mobile. They go into maybe entering some data through a database. The database has data that is given an input into maybe an SAP system. For inventory, then we want to get some customer relationship management data from Salesforce, and we want to then do an electronic payment on an e-commerce platform. And we might be even traversing different clouds in doing so. So now think about that customer journey that I just talked about and doing the end-to-end testing for it, right? That's quite complex, and it needs a environment, of course, test environment that supports testing that, as well as all the tools.
Diego, you said, how do you test that end to end? You've got to go back and say, okay, what was the documented business process? Sorry to be the boring one, coming back to business process, but the process will define, it goes, yeah, indeed. We're starting here. We're kicking something off in Salesforce. It goes into Slack. It then goes through Informatica. It then updates NetSuite, which then we need to understand that picture. And if that's not written down, it's impossible to test.
And probably that's what's making business process management more popular again.
Yeah, and Salesforce has got an approach called UPN, which they've adopted around business process mapping. So it doesn't matter what it is, but we need people to understand that business processes are valuable beyond the life of, oh, we've now written that, we know what to go and do, we'll throw it away. Actually, it has a life beyond that because you use it for testing, and it's what you generate the feedback. It's an important part of that documentation.
Great commentary. Okay, one final question. If you were to have one point to make to the audience, one takeaway to give them, what would it be?
My final takeaway for people that I would like them to take away is that if you have pro developers, make sure that the pro developers are just applying the same concepts that we've been adopting for Agile and DevOps, and with a modern application development approach, right? With automation and with testing as a first-class citizen in that approach. If instead we're referring to low-code developers or citizen developers, more business developers, then first of all, we want to make sure that the testing is easy enough for them, but they should leverage the testing expertise that exists in the organization somewhere, either in a center of excellence or the testers that exist in IT, team up with them to make sure that the level of quality, even of these applications that are written with no code or low code, making sure from the business, making sure that quality is again an important requirement that they meet with what they build and deploy.
Don't think of testing as something that slows you down. think of something that actually accelerates time to value. Getting something into development quickly, having it bounce back out because it breaks something and then having to do a rollback and then doing it again is actually a slow approach. So think of testing as an integral part of accelerating your development cycle rather than seeing it as an unnecessary evil.
I would say think about teaming. We've hinted at it a few times throughout this, but getting things done as a group with different skills, whether ultimately your steel thread that you need to set down, as Ian said, think about your business requirement, define a steel thread that you're going to chase after as a person or as a team, and really understand and map out what tools you're going to need for that, whether that's actually pro code as well as low code or just low code. Think about that, because that'll form the team that you wrap around to create this. And the ability to blend pro code and low code together is really important as well. You don't want to find that you've decided to develop some parts of your solution with code and other parts with low code, only to find that you need an integration task or work to actually bring them together. Think about how low code and pro code work together and how the platform is helping you synthesize those two types of components into one solution and steel thread that you're building.
Thanks everybody for watching our webinar, and thanks especially to Diego and Ian and Andy for sharing your valuable time with us and your insights. We hope everybody picked up some ideas that will help make your low-code application testing a success. For more background on testing and low-code development, definitely check out the Forrester white paper. And for a close-up look at a low-code test automation solution engineered specifically for Salesforce, check out the Provar website, take a look at our reviews on G2, or connect with us directly and let's have a chat about how to make your Salesforce tests unbreakable. Thanks everybody and have a great day.
Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.